Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we have ourselves 3 tracks from an act named KokoroP, if I'm not mispronouncing that, off of the album titled Fifth Charm. And if we switch over to here, the first of these tracks are Hekokoro, a hero with the Japanese as well. We're going to be listening through each of these tracks from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Here on YouTube, let's go, what have we got? Like the vinyl crackle, how gentle it is. Such a mesmerizing synth woodwinds here. A little bit dark. Interesting aesthetic shift there with the minor tone. Is that a phone ringtone or a dial tone in the background? Oh, that got me nice. I love it to pieces. There's just something really distinct about that woodwind tone, especially that sort of main synth there. Especially how it kind of has the guts to go out of tune sometimes. And I mean that genuinely. I think it's such a brave decision to not have everything completely and utterly pitch correct. I adore it. So I'm going to be providing a sort of mini song analysis here per track at the end of each track, as well as an overall sort of conclusion at the end where we're going to be sort of talking about vocals to all the way through to production, as well as any applicable constructive critique. And then, my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think Hekokoro is about? My understanding from doing some DeepL translation is that Hekokoro means self-reflection. And so if we look at this track from the perspective of that, is there are no lyrics within this, it is an instrumental. You can kind of imagine that first part being sort of very peaceful, the thoughts kind of swirling around in our brain. And then there may be being a bit of discord in the midsection as when we would go into some darker thoughts there. And then we gasp, and then we're back into that main theme. We're back into that sort of like row of things there. We kind of pull ourselves out of the darkness and go back to a state of emotional equilibrium. And I think that little gasp there is just such an effective, cool idea because it tells you so much about, it kind of hints at there being a human experience that we're having, you know, because otherwise you might not know the context. The track is 3 minutes long and it's wonderfully textured with a few main sections and themes that become pretty signature and familiar as we go on. It's not perfectly behaved in terms of key signatures and everything like that, but I don't mind that at all. It's nice to have variation with the different chord progressions and bass lines. We have this kind of very chipper, charming boom, 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 which instantly puts forward some extensions within the harmonies there for a bit of emotional complexity to it. Some filtered percussion as well, some little kind of hits there, rotating around those cymbals. Oh no, they're just filtered kicks. They're just very quiet drum kit, aren't they? It's kind of nice to have the kit be different loudnesses through the piece because later on it becomes a bit more pronounced in that low section with the thuds. I think we have some steel drums for those kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of those melodic percussive elements there. They've got a really sort of pure, innocent tone to them that's very kind of like pretty and happy sounding. But then we kind of betray the aesthetic a little bit with that kind of lo-fi hip-hop-ish kind of woodwind synth lead thing that's going on there, playing a really kind of pensive melody there like we are going through our thoughts. Maybe we weren't sure how heavy it was until we got into that. And I think it kind of reminds me of elevator and like intermission music a little bit, primarily because again of how quiet those kicks are. It's almost like the pulse is understated and we're kind of in that fluffy introspective state at first. There's adjustment of the positioning of those notes within the frequency spectrum. We don't just stay in the same range either. We rise a little bit for things to kind of flutter and dance within the ether there. And we've got plenty of room to do so in part because of a lack of vocals due to this being primarily instrumental. So I feel like we make good use of the opportunities with a kind of wow wow, kind of like some modulating and kind of unconventional, a kind of wow wow, kind of raises and lowers itself in a very sort of unusual way that makes it seem a little bit unsure of itself, but also human, a little bit more human at the same time. Almost like it's again part of a vinyl recording where it's starting to fray a little bit around the edges there, become a little bit sort of jaded, I suppose, or faded. But even with the drum kit at that point, I can hear that we're working with some quarters, 8ths and 16th there. We have a relatively sort of like firm sense of pace there with that isolated, but because again it's so subtle there, the main sort of focus are the synth woodwinds and other elements surrounding that. Even with the different kind of like glockenspiels and the sort of crash cymbals all around the stereo field, it leaves you in a position where you appreciate the depth of the actual mix and composition itself with the main layers and sub layers. Around the 1 minute 10, 1 minute 20 mark is where you get those darker notes with a minor tinge to them. And again, you get this feeling with how they complicate things by rubbing up against some of the previous themes sort of melodies. You get the feeling that this is a thought process of something that shouldn't really be there. So it feels uncomfortable initially, and I think it's a brave move to have try and have both of them, you know, to coexist. I think given again the title, if I've translated it correctly, of self-reflection there, it can happen where suddenly, oh, there's some kind of negative stuff going on, my brain's thinking of some dark thoughts, and because of the chilling nature of some of those notes there, they sound very tense and uncomfortable there, very kind of cold, like you're in the frozen snow or something like that. I suppose by virtue of snow being what it is, it's frozen, but you know what I mean. The fact that you've got these really intense reverb layers to them kind of signifies that you're getting lost within it there. There's a lot of depth and airiness to it. It's very spooky sounding, and it's a lot more assertive in how it's trying to make you feel than what we initially might get with the first part. But then of course we drop out, and then we have that gasp. And as we go back to that original theme there, we have do 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 do, some arpeggios going there, or sort of looped melodies that further color the existing chord progressions or sort of like woodwind synth lights that we've had there. They give it further context there. And I like that the drums are a bit more sort of assertive in that part there. They're more like, no, this is where we are now. This is the groove we have. We're kind of walking 1 foot at a time through this. And we also have some phasing or filtering on some of those cymbal hits there. Like there's a lot to appreciate if you take attention to the small little nuances per instrument and how they're affected and how they change and how they sound. My understanding is that KokoroP has been experimenting with game soundtracks for a few years before this, and it shows that you can imagine this being in a game soundtrack for sure. I think partly because of the synthy innocence of it, it reminds me of old, sort of like a lot of old school RPGs and stuff like that. But also it's that you can imagine the audiovisual experience there if you were world building and this was behind it there, like a sleepy town or something like that. And then at night time, maybe it turns into the minor theme and then you come back up when the sun rises. In fact, I think again, the use of the crashes, that glick kind of glockenspielish kind of sounds there are meant to be more playful sounding, almost like we're celebrating the fact that we're not taking things too seriously when we get out of the mire that we're in around the halfway point there. We find our footing and push forward, and it's all very relaxed and chilled out and very sort of like, it's nice sounding, you know? And that further playfulness, as I mentioned again, with the kind of you can kind of imagine like a kid playing a flute or something like this, and it takes a bit of the edge off, as opposed to if it had been perfectly in tune and you're just more sort of accepting a kind of more robotic rendition of it. But when you combine all the different elements within this quite well structured track here, you have chord progressions and melodies that niche together, and you absorb them, and it's just very kind of, and I didn't even mention the kind of pad there that we had around the early stage there. It's just so dreamy. It's so dreamy, and when you add that additional lead on top there, that woodwind synth, it's almost like we are in the mist for that first part. And I think, I'm not sure if that pad is in that second half there. It definitely was in the first. I think it was making up for a lack of drums in the first half, and then the drums become more prominent in sidechain neatly, and you have less of that kind of mistiness there. You're more sort of focused. I've been trying to figure out how to sort of discuss the theme for this track, and it's kind of complicated, but then it's also not. Effectively, you have several sections there, whether we either incorporate major or minor sort of sevenths there, to establish again emotional complexity. They're not want to be too sort of literal with the whether it's happy or sad there, kind of bittersweet almost, you know, maybe not melancholic necessarily, primarily because of the effect that the uncomfortable intervals or sort of like flat seconds or whatever have in that middle section there. It's a deliberate decision to make it sound kind of dark there, for us to take the pause and come out of it just. Again, it builds up, and it's not trying to pretend that it's a super positive environment that you're in, but nonetheless, I just feel like the chord progressions we use, as well as the way that the different elements niche together, creates a fantastic sort of ambience that again furthers the need to not have vocals guiding you along. You can kind of figure it out for yourself. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, the production there is tight. I like again, even without vocals, you can follow along to the track, appreciate the different types of intensity with the drums, the steel drums there as well, the melodic percussion, the different sort of like keys and pads there, and woodwind flute synths and stuff, the little crashes and glockenspiels sort of, you know, decorating the stereo field as well as filling up the frequency spectrum really neatly, including the synth sequences you have additional like later half, and also the pads there. They're not pushing in the limiter too much. It's like loud, but it's not trying to choke or glue itself too tightly. It's more like an adventure you're going on, if that makes any sense. But yeah, just the reverb tails and some of the delays and stuff like that you have around the 110 mark are very sort of surreal sounding. And part of that is also the filtering of elements, as well as kind of allowing space for them and for those notes to kind of start in the middle and then spread outwards there with the way that things have been treated. I know I keep going backwards as well, but just at that 1:50 mark with those sort of uncomfortable chords, just like the tension there, the dread with things just hanging there, not being pushed forward by any sort of specific rhythm, just a whole lot of whole notes. It's just very kind of spooky sounding there. It's not even like an effect choice there, it's just the notes there. It almost becomes a bit sort of like demented or depressed at that point before you come out of that darkness, as I mentioned again, go back to the original theme. You need multiple listens through this track to really appreciate it, but the fundamentals of the production are covered, and I'm going to try to be a bit more succinct with the other two tracks, because we've got Lemon Meadow Is Here, track number 2 for today. I suppose it's a compliment to KokoroP, because there's just a whole lot to discuss. Great combination of acoustic guitar and flute here. strings are just so gentle as well and so bright. No, they're very good at what they do. Good job not committing to that lower note after that lower chromatic. That Portamento synthesis sublead is wild, dude. Is it like a bossa nova groove or something like that on the drums? Great use of the bell curve here. Wonderful. Yeah, no complaints on my part about that. There's just another fantastic track. Lemon Meadow here, it just sounds like a really chill, happy, positive place to be in. I think that it's just another really well structured track with varying sections there with different instrumental makeups that are compelling. In general, it's a completely relaxing tune to listen through. No filler whatsoever throughout the 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes there, because this is a longer track than Hekokoro, but nonetheless time well spent. The drums aren't as hesitant to get involved with this one. They come in a lot earlier, and I think that what's so cool about it is that you immediately get this kind of like 1 and 2-y and a 3 and a 4-y and a maybe we're going with a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of speed, so it's eighth note oriented. We got this kind of Latin American kind of bossa nova or kind of like drum groove there with a mixture of different hi-hats, 16 hi-hats, kicks and snares, or rim shots should I say, and it's just so fragrant, dude. It's just so fragrant. We don't just have the groove the entire time, they just tails, but they keep such a great meter throughout it, and it's just so gentle and easy to listen through. You can kind of like dance yourself away on the beach. And we have these strings that continue through the piece and they just glow. They're so beautiful, man. They are more straightforward with their triads, their like majors and minors, that we aren't trying to overcomplicate with that era, and they just are far more sort of like cheerier to listen to because of that. I think that the chord progressions we have on the keys are fantastic, and those kind of jazzy choices there with the harmonies are just so relaxing to listen to and so soothing. The way they're not sort of too sharp on the high end as well, they're a bit kind of like blunted or filtered there just to help it sort of melt into the mist is really nice. And we have that flute, that woodwind that we had in the previous track come back now, and it's a little bit more sort of assertive and sure of itself as opposed to some of the detuned and kind of like mildly uncomfortable textures in the previous track here. It's very kind of like floral and adds to the jazzy stylings of the keys whilst also not betraying the major or minor the major tonalities of the track and the key signature in general. And we have additional key passages, not just one key, but there's also these kind of like, they kind of remind me of the Super Mario sound font there with some of those kind of underwater sections there. And I think there's also a part of the track where it kind of the stereo field fills out and you kind of feel like you've gone underwater there, like you kind of dived under the waves, and it's just very neat. It's just very clever sound design. And we even have some interesting kind of like chorused intervals on those sort of like key choices there on the right hand there. They aren't just typical, when there might be thirds to be fair, they might be fourths there, but just they sound very bright and they kind of dazzle because of the different sort of parts of the frequency spectrum that they're in. The stereo field though is filled out by these twinkling synths with kind of ping pong delay going through the sides there. It makes the track sound huge because up until this point we've basically been going at like 80 to 90%. And you start to get used to that as a listener, and then they just give you more. And it's so clever because it's just such a great way to change the experience for the listener without needing to go more intense for like a loudness of it, for example. You can still be very gentle and kind of pleasant without it being sort of like oof right in your head. And as we kind of flutter those and go with a faster rhythm, occasionally having 16ths or something like that, it's just incredibly like oof. This has suddenly gotten a little bit kind of quick for my taste. See, we don't linger on it too long. And even if it's a quicker kind of rhythm, it doesn't become like a main layer there. We're not trying to rush the listener through the experience. There's even like the fluttering of water or some blah in that midsection there. It becomes a lot more low key and more sort of low and mid oriented there. And a lot of the brighter elements become a bit more sort of like low mid frequency range oriented, primarily because it's kind of like how you'd imagine music to sound if you're underwater. I think that's just a sensible idea. Again, it helps you to imagine, oh, Lemon Meadow, oh, we're going through the meadow, oh, we've taken a dive in the pool or something like that. And as we come out of that, as we rise out of it there, you have this portamento synth there with the smoothness between the different notes within it. And it just it flutters and goes wherever it wants. Wow. It's just a really fun tone and texture within this track. It's nice to be able to have that, again, that playfulness that we had with other elements within Hekokoro as well there, despite the difference in the subject matter. I think the guitar parts have a great meter alongside the keys as well there. The fingerstyle on the nylon strings is a very appropriate texture for both the style of music that we're putting forward here. And if we'd had sort of two kind of harsher, brighter kind of strummed or kind of chords, it might just have been just a little bit kind of intense in an upper register. So I feel like we navigated these system chord progressions and harmonies really well, and were additive as opposed to, again, trying to dominate. And as the strings kind of built up and went higher and higher, you felt like you were crescendoing somewhere, but then inevitably what occurs is that we come down with the bell curve. We have less of what we had before there because we're trying to sort of have that kind of fantasy of, again, going through Lemon Meadow and then suddenly you're kind of walking away from it again, or maybe things are falling asleep and you're falling asleep in the middle. I'm not sure. Just with, again, less of that high end there, you're left to kind of fall asleep with it. And we kind of gently resolve the track at the end there. We're not too blunt with it. We're not trying to make it cheesy sounding. And I think that, again, part of that is due to the extended kind of chord progressions that add a jazzy kind of like Latin kind of American flamenco feel alongside the drum style and everything like that. So I think we're trying to create music that kind of you can imagine being on the beach there, music you might see from like films, or video games, something like that from that part. But it's also the mood that we're trying to express with this, where it is meant to be sort of gentle and relaxing and just a happy kind and like positive. We're trying to make it positive. It's interesting that I talk about that, not because I'm saying it, but because it's just nice to hear music that is not trying too hard to capture your attention. It invites you gently by offering so much to listen to and interact with, but it's not trying to sort of overwhelm your senses and take you by the nose. And I love when musicians have the confidence to put that forward, especially in instrumental tracks. To have, again, this natural bell curve as we go through the song from up till down there, to have a piece with as many instruments as it does, putting all these sort of ideas forward there with varying kind of like ways of approaching those sort of key sort of like chord progressions, to decorate the frequency spectrum like that without having weird resonant frequencies, to change how it sounds again so that you sound like you're underwater by having the kind of like those textures within the arrangement there, where with existing sort of ingredients we had before to form a connection to the start. And I will go back to the 1 minute 55 mark then, simply if we're going to talk about themes, because there is like a type. You could have very easily have gone from that, but what KokoroP does very, very well here is they don't give you that. They don't allow you to have the satisfaction of it going to that slightly lower note there for the 5th time. It's almost like we're trying to relive or hold on to the moment. We're not ready to let go of it yet. And then maybe when we get into the last part, we're kind of giving into it. But I suppose that with Hekokoro as well as Lemon Meadow Is Here, we have a similar structure where we kind of have an A, a B, and then an A extended or developed side there. And I feel like that's just a sensible decision from a compositional perspective. It's not like that we're sort of copy and pasting stuff, because we're not. But we understand that there needs to be more than just sort of one main concept within the piece, otherwise listeners will get bored. Even if the track is great to listen to, regardless of any sort of potential repetition. And again, to allow ourselves to have all these different elements within, again, the frequency spectrum and stereo field without any resonant frequencies, we just surround you in headphones there, for it to just sound so endearing and charismatic and charming. It is impressive. And at this point, after listening through 2 of these tracks, I think the rest of the album, without having heard it yet, is just going to be phenomenal. But we have the final track for today, Can We Meet at Ocean Floor? They kind of sound like whale sounds, don't they? It's thoroughly pleasant. It's a little bit more chaotic than the previous track, but that's okay. It's like an alarm sound or something like that, eh? Or train. That was it? That was so short. That was crazy, dude. What did we miss? What happened? Can we meet at ocean floor? What happened at the ocean floor? So that was a very short track. Can we meet at ocean floor? And I kind of like that we got so used to the initial concept that by the time we ended and it just kind of started getting, it was like we just left. I think any time that you listen to a track and feel like it ended too soon is a compliment to the chef, if I'm honest. But you get an immediately different mood with this piece, with that kind of synth there, kind of like warbling like that, not holding pitch there, very kind of like tense in a way there. Again, it sounds like you're going to some sort of like boss battle there. And then like the note choice da, 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 of that main sort of synth lead there is very sort of like, oh, unsettled. I don't know whether we want to be a major or a minor scale or melody today. And as we go backwards and forwards with the whale song synthesizers, kind of doing portamento as well as any sort of like bends applicable, little kind of glitters and kind of glitches, kind of like those trills there. They work well to kind of make it sound again like that kind of oceanic kind of theme. I've heard of similar instruments and similar music like this in soundtracks, but it's the fact that it pops up in different parts of the stereo field that's like, oh, where's it going to happen next? And it's simultaneously like intriguing as well as effective, just because it's not too predictable, it's not too overdone. And even if we have occasional chromatics, we end with that boom 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 boom. It's just a very satisfying sort of way to close that loop out and to go back into it again. It lets the listener know, well, even if we go on some wacky adventures with unusual sort of notes or chord progressions, at least we know we're going to end up in the right place. And with the keys as well, sort of adding more color, it's almost like the main purpose of all these different individual instruments is to create sort of main overarching sort of chord passages there, just to elicit a mood. We're not trying to get anything individually to work too hard for attention. It's more about how they sound together. And as we go into some almost kind of like neoclassical stuff, it's just these arpeggios, these kind of notes kind of go, these pedal notes are really fascinating there. It adds a lot of extra excitement to it, again, without trying to up the intensity too much because of the quietness of some of these mains and sub layers and just the actual textures of the notes themselves not being too abrasive at all. I think part of that is because of the liberal use of reverb and some sort of like delay tails there to kind of soften them. The mixing in general is very, very good. I like when we have that kind of lead synth around the 45-second mark that's very kind of peppy and upbeat, and it kind of dances around and it swims around the existing parts that have been pushed in before it. The drums are a bit more kind of like in your face as well there, focusing on the chord note accent but playing some sort of like 8ths and 16ths as well there. The claps are nice and bombastic. In fact, it's relatively just 8ths for the drum kit for most of the time, isn't it? We don't overcomplicate the percussion too much. As we fill out the stereo field, there were more to make it a bit less asymmetrical, not totally because there's different instruments with different sounds on each side. It's not like we're double tracking rhythm guitars, but still the track sounds larger because where previously we had space when something was going on, there is no longer that space anymore, and it just becomes huge. And you even get some sort of like counter melodies there where they'll maybe like go to each other or come back on each other or call and respond there, or counter rhythms there, and it sounds like there's a lot of life going on around you. And as we get into that 1 minute 35 mark there, where things start becoming a lot more quiet and a bit more sort of like uncomfortable or unsettling, you have that kind of alarm sound, almost like, oh wait, we're meeting at the ocean floor. Oh, well, we're going there, but what's happening? Why have things suddenly become quiet? And it kind of reminds you of some of the moods or sort of situations I had with the Crab's Treasure there, some of those soundtracks there as well, which is, again, is a compliment. This is really fantastic music. But as things kind of like fade into obscurity there, it just kind of like this din of the alarm, and then it just stops. But not before you have that kind of cinematic kind of spread of the pan of the bass there, and it becomes like, oh, suddenly we're closed, or what, and it catches you by surprise, like you've been swallowed whole by it. So I think maybe that's the impression we're going for here, where it's meant to sort of be someone being invited to meet someone at the ocean floor, but then what occurs is they get quiet and they get closer to where they're meant to be headed, and then suddenly they get eaten. That's basically it. Maybe it's a whale or something like that. Maybe something like that eats them, and then there's just silence afterwards. I'm not sure. But it's almost like potentially listening through a horror film in a song. And this is just another example of not needing vocals in music. You just don't need that over-explaining. If you can get that communicated through just the instruments and the structuring and the transitions, then it's totally fine. Because things just sit there and they waver for a moment in those last 10 seconds of the piece before you get swallowed up whole. And just the way it goes, it's just so cool from a studio design perspective. Like the production is stellar within this. They're definitely onto it. He's got heavily kind of effects kind of fading and chopping there as well, things kind of sounding like a far off radio signal there, like the vinyl players crackling out of date, and just, oh man, it's really cool. It's just really, really sensational music. So I think, again, thematically it's more about creating this kind of occasional chromatic, a little bit sort of like unusual, but mostly chirpy and cheery, sort of underwater sort of like journey. And we become more assertive towards the midpoint. At the end, things go horribly wrong. Feel free to let me know if I've sort of like misunderstood it, but we don't need more than this. Effectively, it's just a self-contained journey within one, and I feel like, as I understand it, these have been presented or sent through in chronological order, like from the way they were produced. And I think we're continuing to find ourselves more and more as a musician, which is, again, a very positive thing. Great use of automation with the panning, great use of sub layers and filtering there, and deliberate production of things to make the sound a bit more sort of like normal or dissonant. And I like the fact that we aren't having to push things in post with the master in order to get them nice and loud there. We're giving our tracks life, and there's dynamic range to it. We're going to talk about these tracks more in the conclusion. So welcome to the conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks off an album titled Fifth Charm from an act named KokoroP, these songs being Hekokoro, or self-reflection, if I understand correctly, as well as Lemon Meadow in Here and Can We Meet at Ocean Floor. In this section, we're going to be providing an overall sort of like song analysis from vocals through to production, like across these three. So I've already done the per track ones, and this review is already quite exorbitant as it is. It's obviously I feel like I've rambled at parts. We're also going to mention any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do I think these tracks are about? I think as individual concepts, they typically, because again, there were no vocals, so we're going to skip on that front, but they typically matched what I would imagine with, again, self-reflection, that kind of starting with the kind of calm, solemn, kind of positive, a little bit bittersweet sort of like tone across the board with the different instruments, moving into that midsection where things get a bit sort of like subverted and uncomfortable and sort of like minor orientedness, some clashiness between the notes and vocal as well, until we get to the diminished where it gets very dark, and then we gasp and come out of it. I think that the Hekokoro match, it does well there structurally to communicate what it needs to without words. Lemon Meadow is more about, I think, sort of like just enjoying a nice, peaceful, relaxing time on the beach there, or through a meadow there. In the midsection, you go into the water and have a swim there, and it's just very kind of like nice sounding. It's just, but without being cheesy or inauthentic, you know, like it's not like it's safe, you know, we're just trying to sort of like put instruments and process thoughts forward and ideas that build into a specific kind of like feeling that we want to evoke within the listener there. It's very easy to imagine what's going on from the title alone. And then Can We Meet at Ocean Floor, where I think we have positive or like really kind of like optimism about the intentions and the outcome of it, and then suddenly we get swallowed whole. So I think ultimately just very sort of creative music, incredibly sort of well thought out for the most part, and we have just so many different instruments. Like these tracks are typically between 2 to 4 minutes where there were no filler in any of them. There were no points where I felt like things were underdeveloped. I know I mentioned with Can We Meet at Ocean Floor that I would have liked it to go on longer, but then after listening through it, I was like, well, no, actually, no, it ended where it needed to, so it's totally fine. We don't need to sort of embellish it with a whole lot of unnecessary, superfluous kind of additional context if we simply can get it done within 2 minutes or sub 2 minutes. It's totally fine. It works very well isolated by itself. I don't think we're necessarily trying to have sort of a kind of a main sort of like overwhelming or arcing theme between them. This is more sort of exploration, I think, from KokoroP, and I love that. There's no weak tracks within this. Again, structurally fascinating there. We're never too sharp with the transitions either. Like in the Hekokoro, it gets to the point of being kind of very kind of upbeat and chirpy to more sort of like dramatic and sort of sad and kind of very uncomfortable sounding over time around that like mid-minute there. And even then, we try to incorporate previous elements from like sort of the more major sounding section into that part there to sort of illustrate that we're still part of that and connected. But we really do need to have that gasp there before we go back to that extra theme there and pick ourselves back up in order to let the listener know, actually, no, it's not just going to be sad the entire time. I feel like it could have been incredibly depressing, you know, musically effective, but depressing for it to have just finished on that note. So I'm glad that we pulled ourselves up, simply because it makes us feel better about KokoroP and how they're doing as a person, as we assume that music sort of represents maybe what people are going through at that point in time, with or without a lack of context or lyrics. But I think like the instrument choice typically suits the mood of the song well there. Again, Hekokoro has those kind of woodwind flutes that sound very kind of like vibrant and fun, and it's very kind of like twisty-turny, I suppose, to a certain extent. It's got like a better kind of wavering in the pitch there, making it sound like someone's sort of talking, or those are the thought processes inside your head there. The drums are a bit more quiet earlier on there, simply because we're maybe trying to sort of quieten stuff down as we go through and incorporate more of those quarters and eighths and other elements then, with occasional cymbals and glockenspiels and stuff like that. But like it's basically telling you that it wants to sort of allow the main thoughts to have the moment. And then eventually, again, when you go through that kind of darker section in the middle, the drums are more prominent because they're pulling you forward there in a brighter direction. Lemon Meadow Is Here with a combination of sort of like jazzy kind of Latin American kind of like bossa nova-ish kind of like the drum grooves on that they're providing, so there's something you can dance with. There's a dance groove, which is really cool. The extensions to the harmony are more sort of a stylistic, kind of making it sort of a chill positive or a chill happy sort of mood. And again, the use of those kind of flutes and the strings there, nice and bright, encompassing a very sort of pretty atmosphere within the piece there. They fluctuate like the waves, and even like the guitar stylings. You can just imagine someone playing that on the beach there, and it just they niche well. The piano and the guitar suit well. The other sort of like more whole notish elements like the strings there, they provide a nicer pad-like resonance, just like the synth pads that we had in Hekokoro there at the start of the track, where they were more sort of like resolute. And it was punchier in the last third of the piece there when the drums came forward. But initially, it was like we were surrounded by the ether of these synth pads in the mid-range there. It was very kind of fluffy and sort of like, it was comfortable, but also, again, kind of bittersweet. We weren't fully committing to the upbeat yet. But the way things kind of sounded low are kind of like drastic and sort of like discordant around the 1 minute 50 mark with Hekokoro as well, with those bum 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 using chromatics and flat seconds and stuff like that, and kind of like vocal stuff. Like there was some sort of like chops there, or just kind of, it was like we were kind of having a sort of attack or something like that. Whereas with Ocean Floor, that was almost kind of like deceptive in how positive and majorish it was there. Again, it had chromatics with its note choices there, but it was also like, hey, we're gonna just be do, you know, again, those like the use of the steel drums, the use of the kind of like trilled parts there, the drums, the groove of the drums, again with the 1 and 2 and 3 and the 8th note pace, like pushing us forward, was a different kind of dance groove than what we had with Lemon Meadow, where it was more sort of traditional contemporary and like, oh, we can just nod our head to this and not think about it too much. Again, before the end of the track, where there's that massive sort of bass resonance goes, just kind of swallows this hole there. And not least before that part where things sort of die down a little bit, the drums stop and you're just kind of waiting to be swallowed whole. It's a visceral experience. KokoroP uses signature kind of like chord progressions and instrumental elements and melodies that niche together to create the moods that they want in a way where it not only kind of hints at something, but is often kind of blunt about it when it needs to be, like, but only after you think about it for a bit. You need to listen through each of these tracks. Like, I feel like I missed stuff, but I've also said so much. This has been such a long review. There's so much cool stuff to discuss, man. There's just so much cool stuff to discuss. And I'm not trying to over articulate or over explain things at the same time. Like with Ocean Floor, before it goes wrong, it goes and the pitch of everything drops there, and it's just so kind of like, oh, we're falling over, we're falling into the abyss. It's just so vivid. So I can't even be like, that's a major because it wants to be happy, or that was a minor because it wants to be sad there, because it's more about making the style of music we want, choosing the instruments that are appropriate for it, but also messing with the listener's expectations and not just spoon feeding them. The instrument performances across the board are very, very strong. And there's even cheeky little outro music at the end of Can We Meet at Ocean Floor there, where it's very, very quietly just kind of playing through that theme there as you just gaze into the abyss. There's just so much more I want to say there. I think a lot of it comes down to the production side of things though, where it's the presentation of instruments, the texturals and timbres, and how there's no way to resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum. The phenomenal use of filtering and phasing and sub-layering of elements, not some things being deliberately quiet, such as in Hekokoro at the start, where the drums are becoming more prominent as we go through it. The way that things are asymmetrical within the stereo field with Can We Meet at Ocean, until they become more sort of like assertive at the midpoint there, and then everything fades away at the end there. We have like dynamic range through the piece, the actual automation of panning of certain elements like that bass at the end, how it swallows you whole, the modulation on those synths and other elements to make them kind of warble and not keep their pitch when they need to, but also be a bit more sort of like confident and sort of assertive and sort of solid, and Lemon Meadows is. Just the use of strings and other elements there, nice and bright. Just the use of mood and resonances within certain parts of the frequency spectrum. Not that they're like overly resonant, but like to elicit the mood alongside the chord progressions, everything like that. And that gasp there, just it's just wonderful, dude. Just that one little bit of humanity within there to kind of help make the movement towards coming out of that kind of dire state we're in with that panic attack and then moving into the next stage. Nice and loud without pumping, bus compression limiting is handled. No applicable constructive critique. And in terms of general sort of like listener's perspective kind of stuff, I think they should get into game sound design. They can make phenomenal music. I wish them luck with their album It's some of the best stuff I've heard in a while there, and I just feel like I've missed stuff, but I also, again, this has been a very long review and I just don't want to overstay my welcome. But I'd happily listen to this in video games. I'm surprised if they weren't already doing it. So thank you for watching my review of these tracks from an act named KokoroP off the album Fifth Charm. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go some love via their various social medias and the YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever. Thought of crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.